understand as to what thou readest in the King James Version? We're going to look at a tough false friend today, one that I think I may have rediscovered for the 21st century, and I'm not exaggerating. Your inner word nerd is going to be stretched, and it's a deceptively simple word, one that occurs in a verse that nearly every King James reader has encountered, if not memorized. Romans 5:8. But God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It's that word, commendeth. We're going to go through all 5 of my steps for discerning a false friend today. The first time in this series that we've gone to step 5, which is checking linguistic corpora, a linguistic corpus that collects billions of English words. We're actually going to check up on the work of dictionaries to make sure we understand how this word commend is used today. You and I are going to be lexicographers. Let's jump into my 5 steps for discerning false friends in the King James. Our first step is to notice a possible false friend through either contextual conflict or regular checking of other translations. There is a contextual conflict here for sure in Romans 5:8. But God commendeth his love toward us. But this is one it took me probably 30 years and too much education before I ever noticed it. Has anyone else out there ever had this word strike them as odd in this place? Like when Jesus says, "Into thy hands I commend my spirit." The argument in this context in Romans 5 is so clear that it made me assume I understood the word commend. Let's read it. Starting in verse 6, "For when we were yet without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet peradventure for a good man some would even dare to die. But God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." What a powerful argument and a beautiful one. This word commend here just kind of has to mean demonstrates or shows. That's what the context demands. But the King James translators had those words. They could have said, "But God showeth his love toward us," or "But God demonstrateth his love toward us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." They didn't choose those words. They chose commend. Why? In our English, commend just doesn't mean demonstrate. It means to praise in a kind of formal way, right? Like the teacher commended the student for her honesty. And that particular sense of the word commend does occur in the King James Version. They had that sense available to them in their English back then. Take a look at Luke 16:8 in the King James Version. "And the Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely." That is an obscure parable I won't get into explaining. But you get this. The Lord was praising formally the unjust steward for his shrewd actions. But try that sense of formal praise back in Romans 5:8 and see if it works. "But God formally praises his love toward us." That doesn't really, no, that just doesn't work. I'm kind of alarmed that I read past this and memorized it so many times without even noticing that there was a contextual conflict here. It took knowing the concept of false friends to start to spot things like this. Our second step is to look up the underlying Greek word in this case in a responsible original language lexicon. So take a look with me at sunistemi, the Greek word underlying the word commend here in Romans 5:8, and also as we'll see in Romans 3:5. Could it be this sense? God was bringing together by gathering. He was uniting or collecting. No, that doesn't fit. Was he bringing together as friends or in a trusting relationship by commending or recommending? Was he bringing us together with his love, presenting or introducing or recommending someone to someone else? What is he talking about here? He's talking about Romans 16:1. Take a look at it real quick. "I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a servant of the church at Centrii." We do still have that sense of word, as we're going to see in the next step. But that clearly is not what Paul is talking about in Romans 5:8. God was not introducing or recommending his love. That doesn't really make sense. We've got something interesting going on here because one of the senses in BDAG for this word sunistemi includes the gloss or translation commend. But look at that sense. It just doesn't work in this passage, Romans 5:8. So let's take a look at this third sense. And here, this is a perfect fit. to provide evidence of a personal characteristic or claim, namely, I love you, through action, through the cross, through Jesus dying for evil people who were yet sinners. God was demonstrating or showing or bringing out his love. And sure enough, Romans 5:8 is listed here. God shows his love for us. That's a different translation. That's the ESV. Likewise, Romans 3:5 in the King James actually has the word commend. But look at the ESV first. If our unrighteousness serve to show, that's the word, the righteousness of God, what shall we say? Let's look at Romans 3:5 real quick. Get that cross-reference in our head. Romans 3:5, if our unrighteousness commend the righteousness of God, what shall we say? This is a very similar context. Here we have something demonstrating something else. Our unrighteousness, Paul is imagining, though then rejecting that thought, might possibly commend, demonstrate the righteousness of God. And he's basically saying, may it never be. In fact, he says in the next verse, God forbid. Romans 3:5 and Romans 5:8 use the word commend in a similar way, and it just so happens that the word commend here in Romans 3:5 is also translating the word sunistemi, just like Romans 5:8. Our third step is to look up the King James word in a contemporary English dictionary. We're going to use the American Heritage Dictionary, my favorite. Take a look then at the American Heritage Dictionary, the senses it gives of commend. First is to express approval of, to praise. Somebody commended the volunteers for their hard work. That is exactly how I hear the word used most frequently. Definitely they were right to make this sense one. But I have heard these other senses used in contemporary English to represent as worthy, qualified, or desirable, to recommend. I commend her book to you. Very similar to the first, but not the same. It's not praising, it's recommending. I think maybe that's kind of the sense that I had in my mind while reading the King James over many years in Romans 5:8. And check out this related subsense, to cause to be worthy of recommendation. There is much about her book to commend it. Then third, this is a pretty obscure, uncommon, I wouldn't say archaic, but I'd say formal way to say something. To commit to the care of another and trust. He commended the orphans to the care of a guardian. I just can't see somebody saying that in normal, everyday English. That would be a very formal letter or speech. We don't have very much of that left in contemporary English. There are just a few places where formal language is still used. But in those places, commend might be used in this way. Here are definitely the three senses that I'm familiar with. I think the AHD absolutely nailed it. Our fourth step is to look up the King James word in the authoritative and expensive and lengthy and exhaustive and all-time covering Oxford English Dictionary. And here we run into some tough stuff because there are two senses of the word commend that could work. I'm going to admit right now that I don't know which of these two senses the King James translators intended. I'm not certain. But one of them is so perfect and so inviting and works so well in a similar passage just a couple chapters earlier, Romans 3:5, that I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to anoint it my winner. Let's go patiently through these senses and ask, does each one work? To give in trust or charge, deliver to one's care or keeping, to commit in trust. We saw that as sense 3 in the American Heritage Dictionary. Does it work in Romans 5:8? God was giving his love to us in trust or charge, delivering it to our keeping. I don't think that really works. Okay, so let's try something different. How about sense 2? Was he presenting his love to us as worthy of favorable acceptance or regard or consideration or attention or notice? Was he directing attention to his love as worthy of notice or regard? I'm going to say that is possible. That could work in Romans 5:8. But let's hold that in abeyance and look at the next senses. Sense 3, to mention as worthy of acceptance or approval, to express approbation of, to praise or extol. That is the most common sense of the word commend in our English, most definitely. And I've said before, I don't think that works in Romans 5:8. That cannot be what the King James translators meant, even though it is what they mean by that word elsewhere in the King James, and it fits those contexts perfectly. The Lord commended the unjust steward. Okay, how about sense number 4, to set off to advantage or with added grace or luster, etc., to adorn or grace. A wise tongue commendeth knowledge. That's in Coverdale's Bible. What more commendeth a woman than constancy? Gold commends the precious stone. Gold sets off the diamond to advantage with added grace or luster. The light of the candle doth not dazzle, but rather commend the light of the sun. By contrast with the candle, the light of the sun is shown to be glorious. It is set off to advantage. These are example uses of this sense of the word commend. And the last one that the OED has listed comes from 1644, so this sense was still available in 1611. The graceful symmetry that commends the whole pile and structure. I think this sense works better than sense 2. At the very least, I find it aesthetically appealing in a way I don't with sense 2. I want to believe that the King James translators meant this because it is so perfect. When God put Christ on the cross, he sent him there. That was his mission. He was setting off his love to advantage with added grace or luster. He was adding grace and luster. He was adorning or gracing his love. He was doing what a jeweler does when he puts a diamond on a black velvet cushion in his display window. He was setting his love against the dark backdrop of our sin when he displayed that love through Christ's death. But then look what the OED says. That sense is obsolete. Could it be that the King James translators intended sense 2 to present as worthy of favorable acceptance or regard or consideration? I think that's possible. It is just possible that this sense, which is very similar to contemporary senses that we still have, I would say we basically still have this sense. Is it possible this is what they intended? Yes. Is it what I think they intended? No. We can't always know with certainty. We don't speak that English as native speakers, so I can't say with 100% certainty, but I think this is a false friend because the King James translators were using this sense to set off to advantage or with added grace or luster. I think they were using it in Romans 3:5 as well. If our sin commends the righteousness of God. Now we've arrived at bonus step number 5 that we've never used before in a video, but this word calls for it. It's to look up the word in a linguistic corpus. We're going to see which of the senses in the American Heritage Dictionary, the dictionary that records what the word commend means today, which of those senses predominates in our English today. So now we head over to this advanced tool, the Now corpus, and we're going to look up that word commend. In fact, I'm going to make it even more likely that I'm going to discover something similar. I'm going to use the same conjugation of the word, the third person singular, commends, and let's see what we come up with. Out of a huge Now corpus, billions of English words from news articles everywhere, we have got 6,784 hits, and let's take a look at some of them. Now, the goal here is to do this quick, otherwise it really does get tiresome, but take a look at what you're looking at. Here are the dates over here, just recently as I record, actually yesterday. You can see I'm recording this on Sunday, April 19th. In a tennis news article, the word is used. It was used in the Times of Israel, in community.scoop.co.nz, which is a New Zealand newspaper of some kind, the Daily Mirror. There are often sites referenced here from Australia and Indian English, African English. We are trying to cover all of English as it is currently used. Then in the main column, you actually get to see a snippet of the article and you get to see your word in context. So try to go quick with me here. The former number 1 commends the idea. Okay, we're actually getting that sense to represent as worthy, to represent as worthy, qualified, or desirable. I'm a little surprised that that sense 2 would be the first one to show up. Okay, I'm expecting sense 1 from the American Heritage Dictionary more often, to express approval of or to praise. So let's see again. I bet you that's going to come up. Sure enough, Mr. Marin commends the leaders of the Jewish community. RDNZ commends the government on providing our organization with a direct contact. Same thing. Commends RPCs for systematic resumption of work. Commends the Western Cape Education Department on the launch of its emergency school. He commends his deputies and his entire staff for coming to work every day and still doing their work. She commends Alabamians for their cooperation. NLC commends Umahi for paying April's salary. The Union commends the professionalism shown by the Director General. The Union commends its members. Option of remote voting is something Northam's open to. Commends Speaker Filler Corn for pursuing that. Again and again and again, and again and again and again. And I've done some looking through here. I'm seeing that sense one sense. Let's just pick another random one. Agrees to support future activities. UN commends government. Over and over again, we are seeing this number one sense, to express approval of or praise. If I looked long enough, and we just don't have time, you'd get tired of it before we did, we would find examples of the second sense and third sense, I'm sure. But this is what we would not find, this sense. The OED is surely right to call it obsolete. Now, what C.S. Lewis said is that main sense, to express approval of or praise, is what will probably usually occur to you, and if it works, you're going to use it. You're going to go merrily on, even if you're misunderstanding. The context might show you that that doesn't work, that you need this second or this third sense. But your contemporary English ears will never tell you that this is what the word commend means, because that sense is simply no longer available in contemporary English. And somebody else who's got even more time can do more work than I have and look through the Now corpus. This is only the first page of how many hits, and they can see if they can find that sense. I highly doubt that they will. We've got 69 examples here. There are up over 1,000. By all means, search them all, see how many use the sense that I'm saying the King James translators meant. I want to pull this together by sending us back to Romans 5:8. But God commendeth his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. I think the King James translators took advantage of the fact that this word sunistemi can be translated commend elsewhere, and they used a somewhat more obscure sense of that word commend that maybe makes Paul say something a touch more eloquent than he actually intended. Sunistemi seems to me to be a more general word than this very specific sense of, adding grace or luster. So in one sense, the King James translators added a little meaning that Paul didn't put there, but it most definitely fits the context. I would say they gave a slightly dynamic translation when they said, God commendeth his love toward us. They said that what God was doing in sending Christ was putting his love on display, like that jeweler puts that diamond on that black velvet cushion. How beautiful. That is powerful truth set forth in an older version of English by the King James translators. But it's truth that I don't think anybody today is seeing unless they've read my book or check the Oxford English Dictionary on a regular basis. The King James translators were communicating something very specific with this word choice. Hopefully now thou understandest what thou readest in the King James Version a little better.